Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't plan to lead a convoy. I designed traffic systems, studied bottlenecks, and argued about signal timing at public meetings. My days were spreadsheets and weather briefings, not midnight rescues and fuel rations. When the emergency alerts started cycling through stations, first a regional advisory, then a national one, I was on I-88 west of Chicago, driving home from a site inspection in a state pool vehicle. A low ceiling of clouds hung over the interstate, yellow sodium lights stretching in a perfect line. In my rear view, taillights layered into a red river. Up ahead, the message boards that usually warned of lane closures now pulsed a single phrase: avoid urban centres, shelter or evacuate west, use caution. News travelled faster than facts. The radio said the illness began in nursing homes and hospitals, then jumped. Some people faded over days, others seemed fine, and then weren't. People said the word zombie because it was easier than neighbours we can't help. I clicked the NOAA weather band out of habit, just static, then scanned to the GMRS handheld I keep for fieldwork and heard another voice, calm, clipped, trained, asking if anyone could read this net. I answered, and that small choice, keying a mic instead of changing lanes, became the hinge on which the next months would turn. Name is Morales, the voice said. Elena, Illinois Guard. Not acting as an officer, just surviving. We're at the DeKalb Oasis with a handicap bus and a stalled diesel. Anyone with tools? I looked at my trunk, reflective vests, flare kit, a 4-way lug wrench, and the field kit I never returned to the shop, which happened to contain a battery impact driver, a cheap welder in the back from a roadside guardrail repair demonstration, and a brand new tow strap. I keyed the mic, told her what I had, and got a quiet copy and an exit number. By the time I reached the Oasis, a glass box over the tollway, traffic had slowed to a crawl. Families were camped on the shoulder, doors open to the humid night. The southbound lanes were a parking lot, the northbound nearly as bad. I rolled up behind a white Ford E450 cutaway bus with broken hazard lights flashing out of rhythm and a hand-lettered placard in the rear window, home. A woman in a muddy uniform jacket waved me into the service lot. Sergeant Morales was in her 30s, sunburned across the nose, hair tucked under a cap. She moved like she'd been awake for 2 days and still had reserves. Beside her, a tall man with an old welding jacket and a shorter, square-shouldered trucker were peering at a fuel filter head on a Freightliner Cascadia with a 53-foot reefer trailer attached. The truck's driver had the look I'd come to recognize in the weeks to follow, a narrow focus on tasks because the wider picture hurt too much. We're trying to make the highway work for us, Morales said without preamble. Not the other way around. I'm Eleanor. This is Walt. That's Omar. I'm Alex, I said. Department of Transportation. Traffic engineer. Not heavy equipment, but I can read a pump curve, and I brought a flux core machine that will make an inspector cry. Walt grinned, a tired automatic thing. We'll take it. That reefer trailer is full of perishables, and the food in there is the difference between a group and a crowd. We worked under the loading dock lights, while the interstate choked and hummed. The Freightliner's water separator was full of sludge from a bad fuel stop or an old tank. We found a spare filter in the cab, bled the lines manually, and coaxed the big engine toward life. Someone handed me a ham sandwich wrapped in paper and a bottle of water, and I didn't ask where they'd found it. The bus labelled home turned out to be a modified vehicle from a group home, wheelchair lift, extra seats removed for bunks. Inside, a woman named June with a teacher's voice kept a small group calm with stories. A man with a paramedic patch, Maya, was arranging a plastic assortment box into a triage kit with tape and a black marker. In the corner, a young guy with a call sign on his hat, N9 NCO, was futzing with a Yasu handheld. and a roll-up J-pole antenna taped to a broom handle. Our first hours together set our pattern. We named roles because chaos needed labels. The white Ford E450, with its lift, cabinets, and space, became the medical command RV. We slid a folding table in the aisle, taped a laminated state map to it, and marked gas stations along I-88 and I-80 with a symbol for likely fuel. We used a pizza grease pen from the food court to draw a loose convoy formation that none of us had time to rehearse. A lead scout vehicle, fast and nimble, 2 defense trucks with improvised protection, the RV in the center, and Walt's semi bringing up the rear, carrying generator fuel, food, water, and tools. I surrendered the state pool car to someone headed a different direction and took the wheel of an old silver 4Runner someone had left with keys in the cup holder. We armored it as best we could, light steel plates welded to the front quarter panels, wire mesh over the headlights held by self-tapping screws, a scrap of angle iron clamped to a roof rack to push aside loose debris. Omar cut rebar into short spikes and welded them into a short bristle across the front bumper. We pulled the rear seats to store jerry cans, water totes, a toolbox, and the tow strap. On the dash, I taped a strip of blue painter's tape with 3 frequencies. GMRs, 400 and 62.550 for convoy, CB channel 19 for the wider road, and a ham repeater frequency N9 NCO said might hit Rockford if the power stayed up. We painted the sides of each vehicle with a 2-letter code in fluorescent construction paint. LS for lead scout, DT for defense truck, MC for medical command, ST for supply truck, so that if radios failed we could signal by hand. We agreed on 3 horn signals to avoid shouting. 2 short blasts meant stop, 1 long, 1 short meant hazards ahead, 3 rapid meant reverse, tight turn. We rolled at dawn, when people briefly slept, and the highway, while packed, could still inch forward. The first time one of the changed ones approached our formation, the world snapped into tight focus. A man in a torn shirt stumbled between 2 stopped sedans, then accelerated the way a person accelerates down stadium steps. Too fast, hips wrong, arms stiff. The noise of engines drew him like a moth to a porch light. We had to negotiate this new physics of attention. Noise was gravity, and we were a small planet surrounded by falling debris. The defense truck drivers, Omar in a lifted F250 with a farmer's toolbox and a steel lumber rack, and Priya in a battered Chevy 2500 with a roof-mounted spot and a heavy brush guard, steered wide. The man smacked against the side of Omar's truck, bounced, chased, then tripped over a chunk of bumper and fell. I didn't describe details into the radio. I just said, "Contact right, obstacle avoided, maintain spacing." Because words shape rooms, I was careful from the start to choose ones our young and our tired could live with. By early afternoon, we had a shape. We moved in short hops. We avoided tunnels and tight medians. We skirted around anything that would trap heat or sound. Where vehicles were abandoned in tight clusters, we used a tow strap to drag them sideways, creating channels wide enough for the Freightliner. We started to trust hand signals through windshields. We trusted June's voice when she said it was time to stop, stretch, and breathe for 5 minutes. We learned to eat standing at our doors, food kept low and out of sight, because anything that looked like a picnic on a highway would draw more than hunger. The first real test came at the Fox River Bridge, east of DeKalb. 2 jackknife trucks blocked the right lanes, and a tangle of subcompacts and broken glass covered the left. Beyond the curve, I could see more stalled vehicles stacked tight against the guardrail. The bridge's concrete parapets were too high to roll over without tools, and down below, the river cut a slow brown line through thick green. The shoulder was barely a feet wider than our tyres. Survivors were clustered in a minivan with a cracked windshield, hands on the glass, eyes wide. In the middle lane, a school bus sat at a haggard angle, 1 tyre off the rim, hazard lights weak and fading. "Lead, what's your play?" Morales asked on the radio. I got out, walked the approach with my safety vest and a rag on a stick like a flag. Morales moved with me, Maya at our shoulder. The air smelled like hot coolant and summer algae. "We can cut the guardrail," I said, tapping the W-beam with my knuckles. "Slotted bolts every 12 feet. If we cut 2 spans and push them out, we can create an exit and use the shoulder on the outer curve, slow and steady, one vehicle at a time." "Noise?" Maya asked. "Less than trying to bulldoze, more than we like." I glanced at the minivan. "And we can't leave them. If they can walk, we bring them. If not, we load them." "Do it," Morales said. "Omar, you're on the torch. Priya, cover him. We'll get you a straight shot." We marked a work zone the way I'd marked so many on sleepy nights. Cones scavenged from a utility truck, flares that we didn't light because smoke brings attention, a reflective vest propped on a broom handle. The old welder stuttered and sparked as Omar sliced the galvanized bolts. He worked fast, cut plate to plate, and then he and I lifted the rail out of its post like a rib. It fell outward and clanged onto the slope of gravel. The sound rolled across the water and bounced off the far bank, and figures moved in the cars stacked beyond the curve, like birds startled in brush. Priya stood on the parapet with a long pole ending in a steel hook, ready to snag anything that grabbed. We went car to car, tapping frames. "Anyone able to walk?" A young woman pushed the minivan door and joined us, holding the hand of a boy in a Chicago Fire soccer jersey. An older man in the back winced when he moved. We made a chair with our arms and carried him into the RV, where Maya assessed him, and June knelt with a measured calm. A man in a sedan didn't answer my knock. From the angle of his neck and the stillness, I understood why. We recorded plates and left a note with a pen on the glass. "We passed this way. We moved west. We will help who we can." When we started to move vehicles through the gap, the world narrowed to mirrors and inches. "Driver, hands at 10 and 2, look at me," I said to each person, because voice anchors people when the guardrail falls away beneath their tires. Walt threaded the Freightliner with patience born of decades. He trusted my palm, my closed fist. The 2 fingers I waggled to mean 2 inches right. When he cleared, the whole bridge seemed to sigh with us. We cleared the Fox River and the day fell toward evening. We made it past Rochelle and turned south onto I-39 to pick up I-80 west, because the city behind us felt like a wave we couldn't outpace forever. The sky built up a bruise to the west, cumulus towers with a dark base, and the NOAA band gave a baritone monotone when we thumbed back to it. A severe thunderstorm warning marching east at freeway speeds. Wind turbines along the horizon rotated faster. We needed fuel. The Freightliner's tanks were half. Most stations had queues or were dark. We found one with power, a truck stop near Mendota with a line of rigs, a small crowd around the door, and a feeling that was less a vibe than a barometer drop. People were out of patience. News in line spread like a rash. Supply trucks weren't coming, credit systems hiccuping, and every pump felt like the last. "Play it quiet," Morales said. "We're not storming a castle. We're asking for a corner." We pulled into the far side of the lot and stayed tight. We sent 2 to the line with cash and a calm smile. We asked where we could park the semi to not block anyone. We offered to help a family change a tire. The simple act of doing work for strangers lubricated the air. When we got our turn at the diesel island, we kept our heads down and our footprints small. Still, tensions rose when a youth with a bandana around his neck tried to slip a pump handle out of someone else's hand. Voices went sharp. A man stepped forward with clenched fists. Priya stood between them and said, "If this turns into a problem, fuel flow stops and none of us drive away. We're better together 10 minutes longer." That worked. It wouldn't always. But that night, the weather made allies of us all. When the first gust hit, it flipped a lightweight sandwich board across the lot. Rain followed, thin at first, then stair-rod thick. Lightning spidered across the low cloud deck, and for a quarter second, the whole world was in black and white. We pulled close together on the far side of a long cinderblock wall and parked in a U-shape, so our noses pointed out and our doors opened inward to a common space. We threw a tarp between racks and used bungee cords to make a canopy. We ate from the reefer, pears, yogurt, deli meat. June led a quiet inventory. How many in diapers? Who needed medicine in the next 8 hours? Who could take first watch awake and who needed sleep now? The wind found a tin sign and made it speak. The rain on the tarp sounded like hands patting a drum. Flashlight beams flicked between vehicles like fish. At the edge of the lot, figures moved, people without cars, drawn by light, by the existence of a group. I don't know who saw who first, or what small gesture convinced them we weren't going to push them away. A family with 2 small kids joined us under the tarp. A teenage boy on a BMX, bruised from ankle to knee, helped Omar ratchet strap a loose pallet on the trailer. A hairdresser named Sonia sat in the RV and helped Maya tape labels on a bag of saline. We made space. When the storm knocked the power out, we used headlamps aimed at the ceiling of the RV to bounce diffuse light. On the radio, our net stayed quiet except for check-ins. That was the first night we called ourselves by a name. We didn't vote on it. It was what someone wrote on the dry erase board by the door of the RV: Highway Fortress, watch schedule. At 2 in the morning, a small group approached the edge of our U, keeping hands visible. They were led by a woman in a denim jacket, hair braided tight, with a young man at her side carrying a jerry can. "We're not here to take," she said, voice steady but breathy. "We found a place up the road that looks better, fewer lights. But there are people at the back door of the station trying to break the lock. They will come this way if they see your trailer. If you move now, quietly, you can be gone before they see daylight." We rolled within 10 minutes. Our convoy inside those rains looked like a single organism, cars like cells, lights dimmed with tape and ghosted with condensation. On the byroads, tree branches clawed our roofs. We moved along frontage roads, dipped under the interstate, traded open lanes for privacy. When we made it back to I-80 West, the pavement was dark lace under the rain, and we were the only thing moving for miles. The quiet would not last. Quiet seldom did. We set rules the next morning as the storm moved east and the sunrise painted low clouds orange and purple. When we stop in daylight. When we sleep with eyes on us. We don't honk unless we must. We don't shout unless there is fire. We keep a running log on a clipboard. Mile markers, fuel, temps, events. We assign a runner at each stop. A person whose only job is to jog the formation and pass messages. Because radios break, batteries die, and eye contact builds trust in ways silicon cannot. We duct taped glow sticks to the rear of each car for night following, so we could go lights out and still keep cohesion. We set a standard speed of 20 when conditions were dense and 35 when open, because nothing on a blocked highway is gained by going fast into a closure. Those rules saved us more than any strong right arm ever would. The day had its own sharp edge waiting. At mile marker 32 along I-80, a tractor trailer lay across the overpass like a toppled bridge. Beneath it, a compact sedan had rolled and come to rest upside down against the parapet. The tangled scene had drawn people, which had drawn noise, which had drawn the infected. They came in clusters from the on-ramps and out of the ditches, climbing the riprap on all fours with a strength that looked wrong in human frame. A few scattered when a motorcycle revved and sprayed gravel, then came back twice as focused. Engine noise might as well have been a bell at a race start. Our formation slowed as one. "Eyes up," I said, my hands slick on the wheel. "We're not a cavalry charge, we're a math problem." The math said, one exit lane open on the right, blocked at the apex by the semi's trailer. The left lane blocked by a pile-up of cars, the shoulder narrow, the guardrails slotted, posts at standard spacing. The solution echoed the Fox River, make our own path. But here, the calculus added pressure. The infected were on both sides of the overpass, so whatever noise we made needed to be short and sharp, not a drawn-out grind. We pulled the RV tight into the pocket of a Jersey barrier, angled the defense trucks outward, and made a small triangle of safety in a public square. Omar hopped onto the Freightliner's running board and with a grinder made quick work of 2 mounting bolts on the trailer's rear underride guard, the bar that protects small cars from sliding under. He knocked it loose, dragged it to the front of the semi's bumper with Walt, and we lashed it with chains so it stuck out like a cowcatcher on a locomotive. It wouldn't bulldoze a concrete wall, but it would push light obstacles aside and prevent soft-nosed impacts with things we could avoid. While they worked, Priya and I sprinted to the guardrail, cut 2 posts, and together heaved the W-beam outward. The angle iron clanged on concrete. Figures at the edge of the lot turned toward the sound, and a few began their stiff, determined gait. "We're at a decision point," Morales said quietly into the net. "We can clear this and go with what we can carry, or try to do more than the road will hold. We do not have an hour, we have minutes." The decision was as simple as it was cruel. We couldn't open the left lane without a crane. We couldn't save people in the most trapped sedans. We could and would pull out anyone we could safely touch while we opened an exit. That was the line. When I said it aloud, my voice caught. June's didn't. She said, "We carry who we can. We don't break ourselves in the process, because then we fail everyone who remains." We moved on that line. A family of 3 from a hatchback on the shoulder. A dog in the back of a station wagon whose eyes were liquid fear. Man from the rolled sedan who had freed himself and sat on the median, dazed. Blood at his hairline but lucid. Repeating his name and the last mile marker he remembered like a spell. In the other lane, a woman inside a compact pounded on the glass. We couldn't reach her. We wrote a message. We knew she might not be able to read. "West, rest stop, mile 41, help," and we taped it to the window. It was thin paper against thick reality. We left it anyway, because sometimes hope is a practical tool. It gives people direction. We passed the semi through the gap we'd cut and rolled west. In the mirror, the overpass shrank to a diorama. Figures moved where we'd been. It is one thing to choose a path. It is another to live with the image of all the paths you didn't take. That night, when my hands shook, I told Maya about it under the tarp. She said something I would repeat in my head 100 times. We can either be kind to ourselves about our limits, or we can break on them. If we break, we become one more thing other people have to carry. By the second week, the Highway Fortress was more than a nickname. We had modules. The lead Scout, the Forerunner, carried a laptop powered by an inverter, with offline maps and DOT PDFs and truck route restrictions. I used grease pencil to draw detours on the windshield when we rolled, like football plays. The defense trucks were true to name now. We'd cut sheet steel into cowlings and welded them around the wheel wells. We'd bolted wire mesh over the radiators to protect fins from debris. The RV had a whiteboard with columns: medicine, water, food, power. The reefer had become our pantry, and in the cargo bay, our tool crib, a generator, a welder, 2 chainsaws, a bolt cutter, a bucket of ratchet straps, a milk crate of assorted fasteners, and 2 kinds of tape, duct and gaffer. We taught ourselves to harvest fuel without making a scene. We used a hand pump with a clip on ground wire, because sparking in a puddle of gasoline was a bad core memory. We learned which older station tanks sat in low ground where rain pooled, easier to access, but dirtier, requiring more filtration. Walt kept a log of every station where we siphoned, not just to remember, but to leave notes for anyone coming behind. Westbound, 10 gallons pulled, 87 octane, water in tank, filtered, check diesel island, tight turn, trailer drag. Our net grew to include other voices. Some were steady, like a woman with a soft Oklahoma drawl who ran a camp at a university rest area and gave weather updates like a morning show. Some were ghosts of nets, a single burst of words and a carrier tone, then silence. We learned to be stingy with our transmissions. Sound attracts attention in the physical world. Airtime attracts attention on the invisible one. We sent bulletins at agreed times and used short codes to reduce chatter. When we passed other groups, we kept our windows up and shared a thumbs up or a map copy. Community had to be deliberate now, because chance meetings in this era came with an asterisk. On a warm day near the Iowa line, we met one group that felt like a mirror. They were smaller, 3 vehicles, and had turned an overpass into an overcamp. They'd positioned 2 trucks across the ramps to form wedges and hung tarps for shade. A woman in a high-visibility vest stood on the ramp shoulder, directing vehicles through a simple chore: stop, water, move on. They approached us with a flag on a stick, white towel. We rolled slowly, kept doors closed, and smiles visible, and a man with a carpenter's tan, who introduced himself as Samir, offered us a scraped-together survey of conditions westward. He said he'd been a civil engineer before all this. We sat on tyres and talked about bridges, like it was a normal field meeting, and for a few minutes our bodies forgot to be clenched. They asked if we had spare antibiotics. We asked if they had spare air filters. We traded quietly in the middle of the road, and the middle of the road became something like neutral ground. As we wrapped up, a small group approached from the south. Young men with backpacks, walking fast, glancing behind them often. The group at the overcamp did what we would have done. They lifted hands palm out and said, "Stop there, we have procedures." The men stopped at 20 yards, shoulders shifting with breath. One clutching a strap in both hands, not in anger, but in a universal attempt at control. They said they were hungry. They asked to charge phones. They asked for a spare radio. One of them kept looking behind at the on-ramp curve. "Eyes on the ramp," Priya said softly, and I looked, and then I saw why. Not only people approaching, but that peculiar tilt to their gait, that offbeat syncopation that said, "Don't let your muscles relax." We didn't announce it on the air. We didn't shout. Samir's crew worked like we did. They made a decision, offered water, handed over 2 wrapped granola bars and said, "Go, right now. Do not go down that ramp." The young men looked back once more and then went, moving north along the shoulder, quick and quiet. The figures behind them reached the ramp crest and stopped at the sound of our group. Sound is a magnet, and our job was not to be made of iron. We rolled. The overcamp crew rolled their wedges clear and fell in with us for a mile while we cleared that energy. Then we peeled off with waves, and a simple agreed-upon phrase on the radio: "We passed that way. We cut the path we could." Sometimes we couldn't cut a path. At the Quad Cities, a sinkhole had eaten a piece of interstate like a child would a cookie, bite taken out of the edge. A dozen cars had gone in, to the point their front bumpers kissed the muddy slope, and the noise of rescues and attempts had created a gravity well of its own. A line of people had gathered on the far side, carrying totes and bags, looking at the hole with the expression of people looking at the ocean for the first time. Wonder and fear and determination. We could see a longer way around. A frontage road, a railroad crossing, a series of county highways that paralleled the interstate in a ladder formation. But those roads were narrow, lined with ditches, and the semi might not make a particular tight turn near a grain elevator. The interstate was designed for speed and volume, the county roads for rhythm and proximity. Our group was a hybrid, too big for one and too fragile for the other. We scouted the detour on foot, then in the Forerunner, then with the first defense truck as a test. We measured a turn's radius with our feet, and then with a length of rope marked in spray paint at 15 meters. We peeled a convex mirror off a smashed car at the shoulder and mounted it on a post at a blind corner, because good ideas don't stop being good when the world changes. We asked Walt what he needed to make the turn. 5 extra feet of clearance on the inside of the curve. A small fence post removed, a mailbox relocated. We found the homeowner, a man with a 2-day beard wearing a ball cap for a local farm equipment company. We explained our need and offered to put everything back where it was when we were done. He laughed and waved a hand toward his road like he owned its geometry. "Just don't take my wife's peonies," he said. "They'll outlast us all if they're left alone." We left them alone. Walt's trailer missed the peonies by 2 inches. The homeowner whistled. Every day held a small section like that. A place where a group with a plan could move where a crowd could not. That was our advantage and our price. We moved slower than a desperate person sprinting alone. We moved with purpose that compounded. I started writing names and professions on the whiteboard, not because it mattered to task assignment. We're all farmhands now, all line cooks, all electricians, but because it mattered to memory. Elena was guard, yes, but also someone's daughter. who liked salsa music that sounded like summer. Walt was a trucker who'd taken his grandson fishing at a small lake near LaSalle every June. Omar had welded wind chime art on his porch on Sundays before games. Priya had designed lighting rigs for community theatre and could gaffer tape the universe. Maya had been a paramedic for a suburban fire department and had never lost her calm, even when her pager dragged her out of bed at 3 a.m. June had taught first graders to count by fives with a song, and now she used the same melody to get people to remember our radio check schedule. 10 past each hour, keep the signal power. We reached a riverside crossing near Iowa City and found the bridge choked with abandoned cars. We could see the other side through the truss, so close it felt rude. We walked the deck. We found the same slotted bolts in the same pattern, because standards don't forget themselves. But we also found a new threat, a group of people in the shade of the truss, watching us with perfect stillness. They didn't wave. They didn't approach. They didn't seem changed in the way we measured either. It was a third category, one we came to know well. People whose calculus of scarcity had pushed them to sharp edges. Their vehicles were arranged to block. They stood like cornerbacks on a goal line. Elena lifted a hand to shoulder height, palm sideways, a greeting and a question. A person stepped forward. Their voice carried surprisingly well in the truss's acoustics. This side is ours. That side is yours. We're not sharing a bridge. We could have argued that there was no side, that the river flowed one way and the sky another, that the road had been a commons yesterday and should be again tomorrow. But arguments about should were wind with this kind of geometry. I looked at the deck, at the way tires had skidded and burned rubber arc marks near the crown. I looked at the water below, fat and indifferent. I looked at our group, tired, held together by tape and will, and saw the shape of wisdom. Not every straight line between 2 points is a path. Sometimes you go around. We went around, down to a low concrete crossing used by the county for farm rigs in dry months. It was partly submerged. We waded it in the forerunner first, water to the axle. We pulled the VW bus that flooded mid-crossing with the tow strap and a synchronized chant through the window so the driver wouldn't panic. And afterward, we drained its spark plugs, and it sputtered like a lawnmower and then ran. We changed the differential fluid on the far bank, because water and gear teeth make bad neighbors. We wrote a note on a sheet of plywood we found in a ditch and propped it like a billboard. Crossing at Farm Road 7, shallow but passable. Watch current, don't stop midstream. At a rest area that had become a small town. Tents on the grass. A laundry line of shirts strung between 2 maples. A chalkboard with chores like trash patrol and water boil schedule. We stayed 2 days and performed maintenance. We rotated tires and checked torque on the lug nuts. We replaced a serpentine belt on a Cherokee with a belt from a wrecked Liberty that fit well enough with a Pret. We polished headlight lenses with toothpaste from a dented tube to eke out a little more night visibility. We changed oil in anything that ran hot. We triaged our own people too. June had a cough. Likely just the kind travel gives you when you sleep upright too many days. Maya checked everyone's hands and feet for infection, not the new kind, but the old kind, the kind a cut and dirt and tiredness make together. We held a quiet, secular circle under the trees and counted our luck and our losses. That night, lightning flashed so far away it had no thunder. It lit the walking figures on the berms in old-fashioned silhouette. We knew they would wander through, drawn to the scent of cooking or the low generators or the laughing at dusk. We damped our sound. We used hand signals for a few hours. We taught the kids a game of flashlight tag that never left the interior of the U. The highway beyond our arc felt like the surface of a lake at night. Sound moves weird. Reflections trick you, distances collapse and stretch. On the morning of the 12th day west, when cornfields had replaced sound walls and the road had the long, patient feel of a place that connects rather than separates, we found the interchange that became our crucible. From the air, if anyone had flown, this knot of highways would look like a bowl of noodles. From the ground, It was a tiered cake of ramps and bridges, each layer decorated with rows of cars turned at odd angles, like someone had jostled the table, and the toy vehicles had shifted and then been sprayed with glue. The sign said Des Moines in white on green. The lanes were jammed as if a parade had stopped mid-route. The off-ramps were no better. The weave lanes were worse. If we could thread this, we could reach county roads on the far side that, according to a DOT PDF I'd saved months ago, were part of an old designated evacuation path for floods. If we couldn't, we would have to swing far south on roads never meant for a convoy. We parked on the shoulder and scouted. We used the rear deck of a flattened sedan as a table. I drew like I'd drawn 100 detours in normal life. Arrows for traffic flow. Measured rectangles in rough scale. Thick lines for barriers. Dotted lines for paths through. A drone would have been a gift. We had to be our own aerial. We climbed the abutment carefully, one at a time, and looked at the pattern. We saw where people had tried to squeeze and made it worse. 2 rows of cars turned nose to nose like rams. We found, on the inside of a loop ramp, a narrow strip of gravel where the construction crews had stored guardrail sections a lifetime ago. Those rails, if set across 2 lanes like bridges, could make a drivable surface across a shallow ditch that otherwise would trap the semi. We would be building road inside a knot of road with a parts kit we didn't own. "We can do it," I said, heart in my throat as the idea caught wind in the group. "But we'll pull attention. We'll need to run as if we are our own traffic control crew, and we'll need a screen." "A screen?" Elena asked. "Cars positioned to block line of sight from ramps, hoods up, hazard triangles, the old tricks. And we need a distraction. Noise at one end while we work at the other. Not chaos. A planned attractant at the far loop, on a timer, a car alarm even better than a generator." Omar nodded slowly. "I can hotwire a horn. 90 seconds on a relay, then dead. Give us a window." Priya shaded her eyes and pointed down into the tangle. "There," she said. "That old panel van on the outer loop. If we get it to sing, they'll turn to it. We work here." And she marked with her toe a rectangle of gravel where a swale cut between lanes and trapped anything heavier than a Suburban. We broke into crews, not just because that's how the work divided, but because giving people a role keeps panic at bay. Team A, noise. Team B, rails. Team C, lane clearing. Team D, screen. Team E, care and watch at the RV. Maya set out a line of water bottles and arranged the med bag like a mise en place chef lining up spices. June started talking quietly to the kids about how to hold a light and not point it at faces, and how to watch for a hand signal that meant duck and be still. Walt stretched his back and then moved like a man retiring after his own retirement. No extra motion, just the required. Team A popped the hood on the old van and wired its horn to a spare AGM battery with a relay cobbled from a trailer light kit. Omar tested it once, and the blare was enough to raise birds from the few trees left in the cloverleaf. The sound did what sound does now. It created a gravity well. Heads, the wrong kind of heads, turned toward it across the knot. We could almost see lines of attention like dotted arcs in air. Team B, me, Walt and Samir, dragged 2 guardrail sections on a dolly from the storage patch to the swale. They were heavier than they looked, those W-beams, and slick with polymer dust from the spent flare tubes and soot from an old engine fire. I marked the edges with a paint pen, and Walt sighted the truck's path across like a line judge marking a first down. We used cut lengths of 2x6, scavenged from a pallet to wedge the rails, even with the asphalt on both sides. We built it twice, because the first adjustment rocked under my foot. Better to rebuild for 8 minutes than to trust something that shifts at the wrong time. Team C pulled 3 compacts apart with straps and a tug in reverse that would have gotten us yelled at by a state trooper in another era. Team D parked the defense trucks at cross angles, like chess knights in a stagger, hoods up, hazard triangles set back 50 and 100 feet like textbook. We were writing a diagram of order over a picture of flood. When we moved like choreography. The lead Scout rolled across the rail bridge first to proof it, then parked at the far side, angled out as a visual invitation. The RV crept over next, Maya standing in the doorway with a hand on the frame and a second on a strap overhead, eyes scanning. Kids held hands inside. June kept a running count, her teacher's tone flat and reassuring. Walt was last. The Freightliner's front axle came up on the first rail and settled with a sound that went through the bones. The trailer groaned as it climbed. He was a statue behind the wheel. If he turned a quarter-inch wrong, we would either recut or abandon the big truck and become a lighter, less fed group. The horn on the van blared again, 90 seconds of metallic animal sound, and a wave of figures on the far ramp swiveled toward it in unison like sunflowers tracking light. That sound bought us 2 minutes. I didn't look at the clock. I watched the tires and put my palms up and let Walt read my hands the way the interstate reads a river's floodplain. The rear wheels cleared and we breathed. Of course, the world doesn't pause just because you've threaded a needle. A pickup truck on the far loop, one fender dented into a permanent sneer, rolled forward out of the line of vehicles like a dog coming to the fence. 2 people stepped out, hands open, but not in greeting. They didn't feel like people arriving to trade zucchini. They felt like people whose math had come up with a solution that involved possession. Elena stood where the 2 lanes merged and lifted both hands, palms out. The universal sign for stop. Let's think. The 2 considered, and then one kept walking, eyes on the reefer trailer. Want is easy to read, Elena said, loud enough to carry, but not a shout. We move through. We don't stop. We don't take. We don't give. This is a bad place to discover a dispute. Maybe it was her tone. Maybe it was the noise of the van horn faltering into silence like a machine sighing. Maybe it was that behind Elena, 6 adults stood in a row, all wearing the same posture that says, we aren't aggressive, but we remain. Whatever the reason, the 2 stepped aside, we threaded the last lane, and then we were through. And it would be a lie to say none of us cried a little in private at the simple act of exiting a thing. The west side of the knot was clearer. We ran the frontage roads and came to a long, low viaduct where we could pull under and let our engines tick cool. Someone started a small gas stove and made coffee that tasted like triumph. I walked out from under the viaduct into the light and looked back at the interchange, the stacked lanes, the concrete, the frozen choreography of a world that had relied on engineering to keep itself moving. The entire view was what my life had been. Ramp geometry, merge lengths, sight distances, super elevation. I had loved those things because they were fair. If you designed it right, it worked no matter what mood people were in. The new world was not unfair exactly, but the variables had gone wild. We could have ended our movement there, found a Midwestern town with a water tower and a hardware store and a good school library, and set up a perimeter by turning school buses across Main Street. Many groups did that, and many did fine until the season changed, or a fire took a roof. But we had an idea that had grown alongside our convoy. There is a way to live on a road that is not just passing through. We could turn motion into shelter. We could be our own platform. We turned the Semi's trailer into more than a pantry. We added folding platforms on the sides that, when parked, served as workbenches and shade awnings. We marked a canvas in the RV with a grid that mapped the interior, where the medical supplies lived, where the water jugs lived, where the hand washing station lived, so that we could find things in the dark even when someone new had reset the world 12 hours before. We built a shower that used a black 50-gallon drum on the roof of the RV and half an hour of sun to give 3 people 5 minutes of warm water each. We rigged a battery bank and a solar array on the freight box because a silent battery at night is better than the best generator when sound carries. Priya and Nico built a little weather station out of a kestrel meter, a length of dowel, and an old bike mount. We tracked wind and humidity and learned to call rain an hour before it came. It felt like a magic trick until it just felt like data again, and that felt good. There were hard days too. The day we elected a route captain, because consensus had turned into a loop, and we all needed to rest our minds in someone else's choice for a turn-off now and then. The day we got news on the net that a town we'd planned to swing through had closed its bridge with a box truck and a backhoe, not out of animosity, but because their elders asked for quiet and their children needed structure. We sent a message of respect and detoured without bitterness, because a no can be as valuable as a yes if you hear it right. At a farm co-op outside Council Bluffs, we traded canned peaches for diesel and got a lecture on biodiesel blends that made me grin, because my first year out of school, I'd written a paper on the same. We met a woman who'd run the co-op before everything, and she showed us a dealer's manual that explained how to bypass an emission sensor on a tractor that would otherwise coughing idle when you needed it to mow a fire break. We used that trick once, 3 weeks later, to cut a line around a roadside brush fire started by a lightning strike. Our convoy parked on the opposite shoulder like schoolchildren watching a demonstration, water jugs on standby. Ethical calculus didn't get simpler. A week after the interchange, we found a coach bus nose in against a low wall, windows fogged, hazard lights strobing a faint orange. A sign in the front window read, "Special." I saw, in a flash, the prison bus from our scenario planning, the one where you weigh opening doors against not knowing who you're inviting into your tribe. This was not that bus, but the structure of the challenge was the same. A group we didn't know with a small barrier and a big decision. We didn't approach with drama, we approached with procedure. Elena stood where the driver could see her and lifted hands. The driver, a woman with a zebra scarf wound like a bandana, opened the door halfway and shouted through the gap. It was a church bus. Their engine had overheated. They had water and snacks. They had a small, tense argument inside about whether they should wait for family who'd gone ahead or join us for 10 miles to the next rest area where shade and calm lived. We didn't solve their story. We offered our next mile. Sometimes that is the maximum and the minimum. They accepted. We moved together for an hour, then parted with exchanges of hand sanitizer and 2 hymn books that June wanted for the kids, because the paper was thick and the print simple and the songs a shared language, even for those who didn't sing. We learned a kind of diplomacy that is not about treaties, but about signage. We carried cardboard and a thick marker, and we wrote, at dawn, a note every day, as if we were writing to ourselves in the future. Went west, 20 miles, look for silver RV, ask for June. We propped it at interchanges on cross sticks and knew that 99 out of 100 would blow over or be ignored. But every once in a while, at a twilight that felt like a sigh, someone would walk into our camp clutching one and say, "We've been looking for you since mile marker 241. And we would take that person's pack and sit them on a cooler and put a cup of something warm in their hands. This is how you make a road your home, not by owning the asphalt, but by tending its messages. The highway fortress never did become a castle. We stayed light enough to move and disciplined enough to be more than a string of cars. We didn't build towers, we built habits. We learned to sleep in shifts, to have a night language and a day one. We learned to carry 2 of the things that break and none of the things that don't do 6 jobs. We learned that a sticker that says first aid on a bin can lower anxiety without the bin containing anything new, and that has value. We learned that kids can be given responsibility in ways that suit them. Lily, 12, became our water captain in the evening, handing out cups and making sure the hand washing station stayed full. Responsibility is ballast, it keeps you upright. We did in the end take those old flood evacuation routes. We branched south onto state highways with older names and better trees. We found a county fairground with a fence, a well, and a grandstand that cast shade like a gift. We parked in an oval for 3 days and let our bodies remember what it feels like to not brace for a sudden stop. We mended clothes. We rotated watch so that everyone could have one morning where they slept until the sun warmed their cheeks. We held a repair workshop where I taught an 8-year-old to change a tire on a wheelbarrow, because small competencies are the seeds of bigger ones. We sat on bleachers at dusk and listened to a man named Father Collins who insisted we just call him Pat, speak a few calm words about decency and patience and the luxury of gentleness, and even those who didn't come for sermons stayed, because his voice sounded like someone reading the weather. Then we moved, because the road was our platform and our plan. We had a destination in mind, not a city, not a fortress, but a riverside state park with a boat launch and a picnic shelter and a trail system that could be patrolled on bikes. We'd heard from a net we trusted that a group we liked had settled there and was looking for people who knew road and bridge. "We have cooked, we have taught," the voice had said. "But what we do not have are people who know how to build detours and how to crush a culvert properly." I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. It is no small thing to be asked for what you are. On the last morning on that run, as we approached the final interchange that would set us on the state route north to that park, traffic rose like a frozen wave ahead. It was the last choke point out of the region, a place where interstates braided together before thinning into old roads like a river delta. The wreckage was layered, sedans tucked under SUVs at angles, a box truck with its back door partway open, contents long gone, a tow truck sideways, its boom blocking a lane like a lowered drawbridge. The air had that stale, closed smell of a place that had seen a lot of idle, then nothing. The changed were there too, in pockets, some still and some moving without destination. This was the kind of place where groups became stuck and stuck groups became desperate. We stopped 300 feet back, angled our vehicles for a quick turn if one was offered. I took a breath and then another. Our playbook was thick now. We knew how to cut guardrails, build temporary bridges, tow sideways, scream with hoods, make noise and then shut it off. We also knew how to recognize when none of those would grant safe passage at an acceptable cost. The moral math sat alongside the physical. If we screamed through here, we might carry people into a knot they would then spend a week untangling after we left. If we forced a line between two groups whose patience was rope thin, we could make our survival someone else's unsolvable problem. Elena didn't say, "What's your play this time?" She said, "Say what you see." "I see a path to the right through the truck stop frontage road," I said, tracing with a finger on the windshield. "It's worse pavement, more potholes, but it leads to a service road that parallels these ramps and will put us on County 13. We then take Farm 4 to State 22. It's longer by miles, shorter by hours. Say what it costs," she said. "Another half day, more fuel which we have, less tension, fewer unknowns. Say what it saves." "Us," I said, and that sounded selfish until I added, "and anyone whose day we would have made worse by forcing our line through their moment." The day quieted in its middle. We didn't blare horns. We didn't assert presence like a badge. We turned right, slowly, hazards blinking like a murmured "excuse me," and moved along the edge of the knot, our little fleet threading the seam between immediate and eventual. On the service road, a small group waved us over with both arms. That particular windmill that says either help or stop. We pulled into a wide shoulder and kept engines idling. A woman approached, hands open. She had a clipboard. I loved her immediately on sight. "We're trying to organize a shuttle around the worst of it," she said. "Small cars can't get through, but big ones can. If you're willing to tow 3 compacts sideways for us and then drag a minivan backward 10 feet, we can let a dozen cars escape this loop." We did it. Of course we did. The defense trucks made small work of the tow, and the work was neat and contained, and had the feeling I had missed from my old job. A problem set with a solution that, once applied, stayed solved. The small cars exhaled their drivers, who waved and cried and laughed. We waved back, and then we rolled north on County 13, with the good words echoing in the cab. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," and the older words too. "Slow for the curve, watch your mirrors, truck coming right." At the park, there were picnic tables under sycamores and a small amphitheatre where someone had hung a tarp for a projector that would one day show movies again. There were people who knew wood and roof and water, and a place to park our oval, We backed the Freightliner into the shade and popped the awnings like wings. We set the shower drum in the sun, and the kids cheered for warm water like it was ice cream. Priya and Nico mounted the weather mast to a light pole, and we listened for the wind. Walt leaned against the trailer and took off his cap, and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, and looked like a man who had delivered his load at last. I walked down to the boat launch with Eleanor, and we looked at the river, thick and patient. A canoe bumped the dock. A fish rose in a ring. She asked me if I missed the office. I told her yes and no, and sometimes. I said I missed the coffee machine that clacked like a typewriter and the smell of wet wool from co-workers' coats in winter. I didn't miss the endless meetings about left-turn lanes that achieved very little but still managed to exhaust me. This meeting, this moving quorum we had formed, had a clear agenda and minutes you could drive. "You know we won't stay forever," she said. "This is a season. We'll be called again to the road." I knew. The highway fortress wasn't destination, it was method. A way to move through uncertainty without turning into a storm ourselves. A way to be a little quieter than the bad noise and a little brighter than the fear. A way to carry not just food and water and tape, but standards and decency, and the exact right wrench to loosen a fitting instead of breaking the whole assembly. That evening, we had a meeting under the amphitheatre tarp. June wrote a list on the board. What we learned, what we keep, what we teach. We filled it. We decided the kids would run a class for other kids on radio etiquette, how to say your call sign, how to keep it short, how to breathe before you press the button. The adults would teach a course called roadcraft, how to see geometry, how to borrow rail, how to move 3 cars and gain an hour. We would stay here for 3 weeks to plant a garden, mend clothes, rest joints, and help the park crew rebuild a footbridge. Then we would roll again with a smaller trailer full of seeds and parts and a banner that June painted in block letters. We passed this way. Ask for help. Leave a note. On the first quiet night there, no thunder behind it, no generator hum. I lay on my back in the Forerunner under the cracked moon roof, watching a sliver of sky and thinking about lanes and exits and how, when you design a highway, you think you're making a path for cars. What you're making is a way for people to meet. Our convoy had become a moving town with unpaved streets, a grocery aisle on wheels, a clinic that turned on its own axle, a school where the chalkboard was a map and the science lab was the hood of a pickup. The world had changed. Our habits hadn't, at least not the good ones. Signal early, don't block an intersection, leave room to stop, offer help you can complete, take only what you can carry without dropping it on the next mile. The road isn't a place between places anymore. It is where we live for now. And that's all a fortress ever is. Not a wall, not a weapon rack, but a set of choices, repeated until they become a shape no storm can easily change. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.